Welcome back to Mystical Sisterhood. This is your host, Maureen Spielman, and today I have the honor of sitting with Dr. Jill Carnahan, your functional medicine expert. She is the founder of Flatiron Functional Medicine and author of Unexpected, Finding Resilience Through Functional Medicine, Science and Faith, and creator of the documentary Doctor Patients, which I just had time to watch this afternoon, and I can't recommend the movie enough. Dr. Jill, your accolades, your accomplishments are far and wide, but I want to welcome you here today to the Mystical Sisterhood space to share of yourself, your experiences. I find your work incredibly inspiring. I'm fascinated by functional medicine, and I think that there's so much of your story that the audience is going to resonate with too. So just welcome to you.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Yeah. When I was watching Dr. Patient, well, first of all, I'll say I can't even remember how I originally discovered you, but I know that I've been on your email list and I've always stayed on it for what feels like several years. And so it was probably in my quest to find out more about functional medicine that I found you, I have to believe. And when I watched the documentary too, I saw that, similarities in my life in my own ways to your own ways, but just this keen interest in healing from the inside out with our root causes, having gone through journeys of disease and dis-ease in our bodies, and also really utilizing your life experiences to inform your work. So those are very broad, themes from the documentary and what I know of you. But I mean, that being said, I'm kind of fascinated by the fact that your life really does inform your work. And maybe that's a good place to start.
Oh gosh, it's funny because the first thing that happened that was really traumatic was in med school at 25. I found a lump in my breast, and the long short story is I found I had very aggressive breast cancer. And this goes to your story because at that moment, it was traumatic. I mean, my life flashed before my eyes, and I didn't know if I had 6 weeks left or 6 months or 6 years. I had no idea. And it was aggressive, and all of a sudden you're in your 20s. You don't think about these things in your 20s. So it was really, really a shock and a turnaround. And I remember very early in the illness, I was listening to a radio show, and it said the sickness will not end in death, but it's for, I have a faith. And so it was this glory of God. And in that realm, I had this aha. That was my first aha, that there might be experiential things that happened in my life that guided my journey and my teaching. And so there was just this inkling of like, oh, maybe if I frame this suffering in a way that I allow it to be a teacher, and instead of fighting it and going and being angry, to embrace it and allow it to happen and allow whatever happens and to learn in the journey. Like, it literally was that sermon that I heard that said this sickness wanted, and in that moment I was like, I'm not going to die. I just knew it intuitively. I'm not going to die. So why not look at this as a teacher? Now, what happened in those subsequent years is I had more and more and more teachers. And then I learned now it's so clear. My soul's journey is to experience things. Hopefully not everybody has to go through that. But as I experienced, to learn the deepest ability of knowledge that I can share with others to aid them in their suffering and their journey. And it's funny because again, at the beginning, I had no idea and I would never have wished that. But now looking back, every one of those illnesses, everything I've suffered through has been such a blessing because I have a depth of understanding that you could never get from a textbook.
No. And I saw in the documentary how even at points when you reminisce on that and you remember, the emotions come up around it. And I can see how it directly informs how you work with your patients and your clients.
Yeah, there's something about, well, medical school, I think, teaches the compassion out of you. And thank goodness I never lost the compassion. But when you experience suffering, you just have this empathy that, and everybody experiences things. So I'm not unique in that, but that depth of understanding, like what someone, like if you say you have breast cancer, I'm like, I know what that's like, right? Like I really, really get it. I know what it's like to lose all my hair and to be curled up in a ball after chemotherapy and all of those things. And so when someone's going through that, my heart feels for them because I'm like, I know it's hard.
Absolutely. And the experiences are so multidimensional too. That must be part of functional medicine as well, where we're really considering the whole person, the spiritual, the emotional, the physical, and the mental.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was part of it because I went in. So I grew up on a farm and, very holistic kind of upbringing with a garden. And my mother was a retired nurse to raise all of us 5 children. And so we
Wow.
had an idea that food was medicine and that, you eat healthy and live longer and those kind of basic principles. But it took it to a new level when I experienced illness because I still did a lot of the traditional chemotherapy, radiation,
Yeah.
but my whole passion had been holistic. Not only how do we reverse illness, but also how do we actually go to the root cause, which is really
Yeah.
what functional medicine is. So I'm living it, not only learning it, but then like, how do I do this with breast cancer, right? And I still had to do the traditional therapy. And I always say that was actually easy, but it's more the therapy getting through the breast cancer that actually harmed my body longer term. I don't have any regrets, right? Like it saved my
Mhm.
life, but it's so toxic and so harmful to the body that in the subsequent years, I've had to really use all those holistic principles of nutrition and diet and lifestyle, prayer, meditation practices, biohacking, so that I could actually really recover strength and restore my cells from that damage.
Yeah, it's an amazing journey, and I have to tell you because I'm right outside of Chicago, so you were in Illinois both for your undergraduate and then your medical degrees I saw,
Yeah.
and Loyola. I'm not sure if you were at the Maywood campus or in the city, but that's a stone's throw from me. And so to see that you were from this area of the country was just and you had footage of yourself on
Yeah.
Lake Michigan, and just because that was it just feels like such a defining part of your life as to laying the groundwork for the work you were going to do in the world.
Yeah, it's now looking back, it's like almost not ironic if that's my life journey to be a healer, that I would get breast cancer in med school. Like that was part of my training. At the time, it was just shock. In fact, I mentioned this in the book and the movie, but I was 25 at my diagnosis. I had just turned 25. So my lump was found at 24, but I
Hmm.
was the youngest woman at Loyola Medical Center to ever be diagnosed. And of course, that's 20 years ago now. Sadly, there's been a lot of young people that are diagnosed.
Yeah.
So it's
Hmm.
not as unique, but at the time it was such an outlier. Like the whole staff, my medical class, everybody was shocked that a
Hmm.
25-year-old would get aggressive breast cancer. So it
Wow.
was
Yeah.
part of the teaching. I didn't really know it, but
And you, during that time, did you uphold all your studies as best as you could? Did you ever take a time out? I also know that you came from a family where the work ethic was working many hours of the day.
yes.
So, how was that? Did you carry your load or did you let go of anything at that time?
That's such a great question because I will never forget the diagnosis. And then in my mind, I was like, oh, I'm just going to keep going. No one will even know I have cancer. I'll do the chemo on the side, like on a weekend. And like my mind had already planned how no one would ever find out. I would just go
Mm,
through chemo and get through school and whatever.
wow.
Well, I had my first chemo treatment and it is brutal. I had 3 drugs. I lost all my hair and it was some of the sickest I've ever been in my life. And so after that first round of chemo, it was so clear there was no way I could possibly continue. And so I had to actually surrender to that because again,
Mhm.
it felt like a weakness. It felt like I was giving up or like not being. And again, my background was this strong, be brave, don't
Yeah.
complain, pull up by the bootstraps, kind of the Midwestern farm mentality. And I had to really come up against that and admit, like, I need a break. I need to rest. And so I took 9 months off to do treatment. And of course, it was the right
Wow.
thing. But even
Yeah.
after that, if I look back at that girl in her 20s, that was me, I wish I would have said, sweetheart, take some more time. I literally got
Mhm.
done with radiation chemo in probably the next 2 weeks and then back to rotations. And then part of my story is within 6 months, I had severe diarrhea, abdominal pain, bleeding, weight loss, and I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. Now,
Yeah.
I don't know, it could have happened no matter what had I taken more time, but certainly I did not let myself rest. And that was a huge lesson and a huge lesson
Mhm.
now I talk to my patients about because we have to be kind to ourselves. We have to take that time and allow ourselves time to think or meditate or grieve or whatever. And I did not allow myself very much time there.
Yeah, I know, and just so much compassion for that young girl now, right, who didn't know. She just didn't know to take that time. Two things that I'm thinking about is you're jogging my memory. I did an episode back. This podcast we're at about 71 episodes right now, so it started in January of
Awesome.
2023. But I had done an episode in the fall called maybe in the late summer, How to Be Your Best Advocate. I think it was during October for Breast Cancer
Yes.
Awareness Month, but I remembered you saying in the documentary when you had a hard time with some of the harsh drugs, you became an advocate for yourself. Does it feel like that was the first time in your life where you began to step into using your voice for what you were sensing was right for you?
This is so relevant. I'll tell my story, but I want the listener to hear this, because if you're going through, if a loved one's going through cancer, difficult diagnosis, or anything like that, I literally today so often sit with a patient who's just been given maybe a cancer diagnosis and say, don't feel pressured. Like, yes, you need to get treatment and you need to decide, but you're going to go to the oncologist and they're going to say, we're going to start tomorrow, and this is the 3 drugs and this is the kind of radiation, and you need to be ready. And the truth is, these treatments might be exactly the right thing, but most of them are brutal on the body because they're indiscriminately killing cells. And what I had to do is really go to my heart. I went to the medical school library, took out loads and loads of journals and books and read and studied, because I had to figure out, like, what's right for me, because you have these huge studies. And I'll never forget, one of the common things was lumpectomy plus radiation, which means you take out the tumor and then you radiate that part of the breast so that you don't have any tumor cells left. And I asked them specifically about the kind of radiation they were going to do, which actually on my left side would have gone and hit some of the heart and lung and maybe permanently damaged my heart and lung to some extent. And I asked them, I said, this has its side effects. It's going to cause skin damage, maybe heart and lung damage.
Yeah.
What's the actually extension of life on someone like me? And they gave me like a few months. Like, I was like, really? So all of this damage for 3 months of extra lifespan. And there was no increase in mortality, which means in this particular study, in my case, they were saying this radiation actually doesn't extend your life at all. It just decreases recurrence by a few months. When I actually heard the data, I was like, wait a second. Why would, now I ended up doing a type of radiation, so I did do a piece of that, but I actually went outside the norm to an experimental study, did a completely outside the box type of radiation to protect my heart and lungs. And that was all because I started asking questions, because even though standard of care might be what they do for everybody, you're a unique person. And I love encouraging people to really trust their gut, trust their intuition, because the oncologist wants to do whatever they can. So for them to do nothing feels wrong. But sometimes, especially if it's like a terminal stage 4 cancer, doing nothing or just being with your family with the best of the health, because often those chemo drugs will make you feel way worse. And then what I've heard more often than not in a late stage cancer is someone saying, I wish I wouldn't have done that chemo because I got so sick from it, and the quality of life I had in the end. Now, this is not saying you shouldn't do chemo. I did it. I did aggressive chemo. So please hear me. I'm just saying, as you talk to your doctors, get second opinions, take your time, make sure your heart and soul are at peace with your decision. Don't be pressured by an external authority, because that is the most powerful healer, is when you know what's right for you.
Yeah. And would you say for a person, because I've watched some people traverse their journeys when they get a diagnosis, and all of a sudden, because I had a form of breast cancer that was, I think they called it grade 2. So it wasn't super fast moving, and I didn't have to make decisions really fast. And then I see other people put in situations where they're going to see an oncologist like 3 or 4 days later. I have a hard time understanding the discrepancies completely about what's going on. I think different medical systems have different protocols and agendas and things like that. But for a person who feels so hurried and feels like they're given something, would you still say, just sit a little bit more, just sit a little bit with it?
Yeah. And even if it's a weekend, if all you have is a week to decide, you can still, like, I see so many people, way more than not, feeling a pressure to do something, even the doctors, versus wait. And again, there might be some alternative, but that pressure, I think, is wrong. And again, there is a limitation. Like, you might need to decide in a month, or you might decide in a week, or it might be 6 months. Some people have more time. But even within whatever realm of time you have, I like people, because if you go into that feeling unsettled, like something's not right about it, you're always going to second guess yourself. Did I use, like I said, end of life? I've sat with some people who are stage 4 cancer that said, I wish I wouldn't have done chemo. I'm so sick, and I would have, and because seeing those kinds of regrets, I don't want my patient to have regret. And so I remember, for me, I took all the data, I prayed and thought and meditated about it, made a decision. And not once, it has damaged my immune system. It has caused some issues, but there's never been a moment in my life where it said, what if I wouldn't have done that? I was so sure. So when you make that decision, you go with confidence, with all your whole self, and never, ever, ever look back, because that regret will destroy you.
Yes. That resonates with me a lot. And those are just such hard decisions along the way. So I see you as when you went through it when you were young, even though you couldn't give yourself some of the care and compassion that you needed, you still had some practices that seem to have support you well, and introspection and meditation and your faith that kind of carried you through it, sounds like. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
neat.
I mean,
Mhm.
now I'd call myself a mystic. I love your podcast because like that contemplative, my background's Christian, but in a sense, I'm very, very deeply contemplative. And I
Yes.
feel like the divine is with me, guiding me all the time. And and
Mhm.
again, I think when we get distracted or we do things that aren't aligned, we can kind of feel like that disconnect. But for me, one of the most important things in my life is staying connected to the divine energy and
I love
feeling that
that.
guide me. And even like with patients all the time, I'm like, I literally will say a prayer like, divine help me to have the right answers. And so often some of the things that come to my mind and end up being the right answer, I know it's not from me. Like I know that I
Right.
have right, a divine helper
Yeah.
with me all the time. And so that's very real for me. And even in the midst of my biggest suffering, I think that gave me great comfort because they talk about the blue zones and all these people who live over 100 and some of the most important things. One of the most important practices, however it looks for you, is having a purpose greater than yourself. And again,
Yes.
that's a very spiritual thing, but it doesn't have to be Christian. It could be any sort of background, even agnostic. I have an agnostic friend that's all about the environment, and that's spiritual, so there doesn't have to be a certain way, but having a belief in something more
Yes.
important than just yourself is
Yeah.
really powerful.
That's powerful. Thanks for sharing it. And I would think that most doctors, it would feel very vulnerable to say that out loud. Our typical Western doctors, I've never heard anyone else share their faith or spirituality. So thank you for sharing it with us.
You're welcome. I feel like it's so important because the truth is we all wonder and question and what happens after life and all the kinds of things
Yeah.
after death and life. So those things were all universal. And I think in medicine we're very taught to be objective and to not go to those places. But what I've found is when I shed a tear with patients who's suffering or when I share just a tiny glimpse of, hey, I went through that, I know how hard it is. It doesn't have to be about me, but those are our connective tissue, is our stories and our experiences. And if I filter that out of my clinical practice, there's like a disconnect, and there's also like a physician could be seen as paternalistic or authoritarian. I don't feel that way. I am right there with you in the journey. I have
Hmm.
questions just like you do. I'm here to help
Hmm.
you and I'll give you wisdom, but I am right alongside of you. I'm not better than you. I don't think that I have all the answers, and so we together
Yeah.
do that journey of figuring out what the best route for them is. And I might bring the wisdom and maybe bring the medical studies, but
Yeah.
I consider myself a co-person, a co-author of the journey.
Yeah. And a lot of people too, Dr. Jill, they don't even understand what functional medicine is, what a functional doctor does. So can you offer that a little bit? I know that it's a growing field as well. It's sometimes in communities hard to find a functional medicine doctor who's available, but what does it mean?
Yeah. So just for background, I'm an MD trained in family medicine. So, but a lot of people, you could doctor of chiropractic, naturopathic doctor, nutritionist can practice, or not maybe practice functional medicine, but do integrative functional techniques. So all that to say, functional really is back in medical school, we were taught physiology, biology, chemistry, and we learned all the pathways of where the nutrients go and how things function. Like if we were looking under the hood of the car, we're looking at all the different gears and gadgets and how things work together. And then towards the last part of medical school, you do rotations, and it's very pharmaceutical driven. So most of the time you learn to get a diagnosis out of many and figure out which one thing does this patient have. And then typically the response is here's a referral for surgery or physical therapy or a medication. And that's really
Hmm.
simplified. But what we're mostly taught is how to use drugs and pharmaceuticals to fix or to solve symptoms. But what we aren't really going into in medical school as much is what happened along that patient's trajectory to lead to this disease, to lead to this autoimmunity, and to really ask the question why, which is my favorite question as a medical detective. So in functional medicine, we actually ask the why, and we look at all those biochemical pathways under the hood of the car and say, what mechanisms, what genetics, what biochemistry, what lack of nutrients, what's excessive toxic. So it's almost always lack of something important or excess of something toxic. And we're
Hmm.
looking at what things led to this diagnosis diagnosis of autoimmunity or to this
Yeah.
diagnosis of IBS or whatever kind of thing. And
Yeah.
then we're saying, okay, what would be the pathway back to take this person to reverse that or to improve things, not just band-aiding a symptom with a drug, which we use drugs too, but really saying, how do we reverse this process? And that to me is exciting.
Yeah, it's so exciting. And sometimes I'm thinking when we give someone a drug, when we just look at what the presenting symptoms are and we give them a medication on top of it, then unless there's diet changes or nutrition or some change within and other supplementation, it feels like in ways we're just putting a Band-Aid and assuming so often that's going to be a lifelong issue.
Yeah,
And
that's
so,
right.
yeah.
I was just going to share real briefly. So I mentioned this earlier, but after the breast cancer, 6 months later, I was told I had Crohn's disease. I was told it was incurable. You're going to need lifelong medication. You're probably going to need a bowel resection at some point. Very hopeless. And I remember leaving the doctor's office, and right before I left, I thought, you know what? Does diet have anything to do with this? Because I was willing to do my part. He didn't even pause, and he said, Jill, diet has nothing to do with this. But back to intuition, I didn't know much. I was a third year medical student. I was not a nutritionist, but somewhere inside of me, I thought, this is a gut disorder. How in the world can food not affect this issue? And I was kind of frustrated, and I left and I went to the library and started studying to try to find that root cause. And I did turn out, I am healed from Crohn's disease. I do not have it anymore. And I was told it was incurable. So many people are told by their doctor, this is what you're going to need for life. This is incurable. And in the world of functional medicine, not 100% of the time, but many times we actually find a way to reverse that trajectory to things that were considered irreversible.
And when you have a patient who, I think you had it in the documentary, you said this is not easy, but let's say you have something going on in your body that's calling for significant diet change, gluten-free or dairy-free. How do you look at that? Because I think if that's necessarily true, it's how we approach it and how we look at it.
So true, because I have this happen in the clinic almost on a daily basis. Someone once said that diet is harder to change than religion. So I think that's kind of funny, maybe a little bit true.
Yeah.
But usually what happens, there's reasons like the microbiome or patterns when we grew up and we were given a reward of ice cream for something we did well. And there's reasons behind the attachment to food, and it can be addiction. It can be like in that way. But the truth is, like, as people have information to know that, for example, gluten for them is like kryptonite and it's very, very toxic. And if they continue eating it, they may develop autoimmunity or something else. And as I describe, and I can even look at testing to say what kind of foods are better or worse, or what should you avoid, and then giving them that data to decide and then empowering them with alternatives. Often they'll find when people feel empowered, they feel like they have some control. And the biggest thing, Hanselier did the research on stressors, and there was an acronym called NUTS, N-U-T-S. And these are the things that cause the highest raise in stress levels or cortisol in humans. It's based on research. Novelty, something new, unpredictability, threat to health or threat to ego, and last one, sense of control. So when we give back the patient some sense of control, like, okay, well, I can actually change my health by changing my diet, even if it's hard, all of a sudden they have something that they have control over. And I think that's empowering.
It's so empowering. And this hardship that I'll say that I've sometimes put on changing food, it's really, I feel like you're saying, like it exists in my cells. It's how I grew up. It's how, and it's conditioning that this other way, the standard American diet. I mean, I'm far from that, but in a sense, that's easy. That's accessible. This is hard, but it's not really true. I feel like it's dispelling a truth around that, and then getting to know how good it feels and how empowering it is.
Yeah, that's so true. And it really is. Everything's about habits. And let me just share something. I think this will resonate with your listeners. Habits for some people are like so frustrating. They try in January to do this or go to the gym or make these changes, and then by February it's gone. Habits will stick if you create an identity around it. And this is what I mean. So if I am someone who has celiac disease and I don't eat gluten, if I go to a restaurant and someone puts a bread basket in front of me, my identity is I don't eat gluten. There's not even a question. I don't have to make a decision, because what happens with our decision-making power, it's kind of like a gas tank that's full. And by the end of the day, and we've made all these decisions, that's why we typically have candy or ice cream or cheat or whatever kind of things at
Yes.
night, because
Uh-huh.
we've run out of willpower to say no to that thing. But if I don't smoke. And so if someone offers me a cigarette, there's not even a thought in the world of should I not, maybe not. And so when we have an identity around, like I have heard this before, I am a healthy person. When we
Hmm.
tell ourselves I am a healthy person, well, what would a healthy person do? Oh, well, maybe they wouldn't eat that sundae with hot
Yeah.
fudge, right? So there's this identity shift that when we become that person, or we even just tell ourselves, even if we're not there yet, I am a healthy person, not I
Yeah.
want to be, and not
Hmm.
I want to quit XYZ, but we say, I am a healthy person. I am a non-smoker. I am a
Hmm.
gluten-free person, whatever kind of thing. All of a
Yeah.
sudden, it actually, that identity makes it very easy to forego the temptation when it happens.
Yes. And I heard just the other day from an astrologer, she was talking about I am statements. And she said, when we say it out loud, so if you say, I am healthy, let's say, it comes out of your mouth, it goes into your hearing, and then it remaps on the brain. So she was even saying you can quietly, you have mantras like this, I am healthy, I am, whatever the I am is. And I thought that that was really powerful because I never heard about the mapping that it was doing if you said it aloud to yourself. She's like, you say it quietly, but I thought it was simple but really powerful.
Oh, it is. Years ago after the Crohn's and all that, and after my divorce, which was a big trauma for me and trying to remap, and it was awakening. It was beautiful, but at the moment it was hard. I
Yeah.
started walking, and I would say, every day in every way, I'm stronger and healthier, wealthier and more resilient, younger and more beautiful. I will overcome all obstacles. I will outlast all adversity. Things are turning in my favor. And every year I added, like this year, it was like I added to that. I said, I don't do overwhelm and I don't do overcommitment anymore. So like, I just keeps getting longer every year. But what happened is this was like 7, 8 years ago. And as
Mhm.
I integrated into my subconscious, again, those were just things that I became. And
Yeah.
it's amazing to me how powerful that is to really
Yes.
state it.
That's beautiful. I love that. If where is that in your book or like, I just love the
I'll
mantra.
email you. Yeah.
It's I sometimes I put these things on screensavers. I make them really
Me
accessible.
too.
So you are just a being a physician, being a functional medicine doctor is not a job to you. It's a lifestyle. It's you are just right in there in oneness with the people who come to see you. So can you tell me, because we're talking about, our bodies, first of all, just how you understand as the body as such an intelligent system? Like what can the listener know about that to cue into signs, how the body speaks to them?
Yeah. Two things come to mind. One is my early life. I was very analytical. I was bioengineering background, in medicine, so lots of left brain in the mind kind of calculating. And I really had to get through some of those difficult times before I really understood somatic experiencing and actually feeling your feelings, your body, your sensations, and letting them guide you. I kind of say I lived from the neck up, and it was all about my brain. And I was almost like, shut up, body, you need to behave. I got things to do, right? Like it was almost
Yeah.
like, be quiet. I don't, and there's no wonder I got autoimmunity and breast cancer, because I was really suppressing my physical sensations in order to get through. And medical school was brutal, the hours and the stresses and everything. And I did it, and I didn't feel like it was awful at the time. But looking back, I'm like, oh, I had to really suppress my sensations of my body that were telling me to slow down and to take it easy, and to maybe this is too difficult, or not too difficult, but you need to just take care of yourself. So that's one thing I teach people now, to actually get into their bodies, somatically experience, and actually maybe close their eyes, put their hand on their heart and their belly, and actually, what is the sensation in my body right now? And using that to guide, like we said about maybe cancer treatments, or maybe a decision to be in a relationship or not, and feeling into, does this feel expansive or does it feel contractive? And that's a
Yeah.
great like metaphor for good things, or contraction, meaning something that's not good, maybe like murky, or not unsettled. Those are all kinds of words we might feel, and that'd be like a relationship, a situation, a job, a cancer treatment, that might help guide you. And I didn't know how to do that until after 40. So that's
Yeah.
one thing that's so important. And then the other thing is really like being kind to yourself. like
Yeah.
letting yourself take a break, letting yourself say no, letting yourself disappoint people. I was starting to really, really do this year, and I had cut back so much on my speaking and traveling to take care of myself, right? Well, February
Right.
came along and I was roller skating to take out the garbage, and I fell and I broke my wrist and I had surgery. And it's so funny though, the moment that happened, I looked down at my wrist and it was clearly broken. There was no question. But it was almost like there was a weird little, I mean, granted, I was like, oh, this is going to suck. It's going to take some time. But I wasn't even angry. I was
Yeah.
like, the divine was saying, you need to slow down even
Slow.
more. And I
Mhm.
heard it, like I heard it loud and
Yeah.
clear. And I almost laughed because I thought, this is so hysterical. Who roller skates
Yes.
to take out the garbage, breaks their arm? But it's this divine message. And guess what? That whole from January until now, there's only 2 things that I had planned for travel. They were East Coast and West Coast, and they were right
Yeah.
after I broke my wrist. I had to call these beautiful people who sponsored me, took care of everything, and were planning on
Yeah.
me showing up, and tell them, I am so sorry, but I can't come. I have to have surgery. And it was
Mhm.
hard. And it was
Yeah.
at the same time beautiful because I was learning to actually take care of myself and to let people down. And it was hard because I would have loved to be there. But that
Mhm.
lesson was, no, you have to listen to your
Ah,
body. You
yes.
have
Yeah. Yeah, you have to. And thanks for sharing that, the slowing down, the messages that we sometimes get in really difficult ways. And I would imagine that because your work is in you and your work is in such demand that it is hard to say no. But then are there newer creative ways which you're learning to share your work that might not feel as like taking up so much time? Or I mean you only have so much time, so
to
are is the work starting to come through in new ways?
Maureen, you had the best questions. I just love talking to you because even this is like literally such a relevant, because for everybody, right, is how do we do? I have a little sticky in my medicine cabinet. It's nothing fancy. It's not a sticky note. It's kind of scrawled. And it says, and I see it every morning when I open that up to take out my hair product or whatever, it says, what does she need from me today?
Mm.
And I love reminding myself, right? Because it's like, what do I really need? Do I need a rest? Do I need a nap? Do I need a healthy snack? Do I need to
Mm.
say no? Do I need to go do something? Do I need to call a friend? And it's a real good reminder because when we check in, and our body knows what we need. And it's
Yeah.
often we just ignore it or we push
Mhm.
or we do what others' expectations of us are, which again,
Yes.
it's wonderful to show up for people and to take care of their needs. But even breast cancer as a metaphor, Gabor
Mhm.
Mate talks about how breast cancer is actually nourishing our breast or nourishing infants, right?
Mm.
And because of that, the metaphor of breast cancer is over nourishing those around us and not nourishing
Yes.
our own bodies.
Mhm.
And I think it's
Mhm.
very real. You and I can probably both relate. And again, not that we
Absolutely.
have to not take care of people or love people, but we have to first take care of this body. And if we don't take care of
That's
this gift,
yeah.
we can't take care of anybody else. So,
Yeah, I believe in all of that too. And then because what I was thinking about when you were sharing the sticky on your mirror is that so many people, I saw it in your documentary, they love your work. You help turn around their lives in probably most cases, but it's you're at the center to go back and love yourself.
yeah.
And that's
Yes.
wonderful when we have fans or we have people giving us that outer validation. You're not looking for it, but it's there. But really, it's an inside job for us to go back to what does she need today in this moment.
Yes, yes.
Hmm.
And I didn't really answer your question, but one of the little magical things that happened was at the beginning of the year, I was praying about how do I still inspire and teach the world and do what I love to do, but
Yeah.
not kill myself with the travel. Because at the end of the year, I was just almost comatose with fatigue and exhaustion. I was like, I can't do this in 2024. Well, I
Hmm.
just started meditating on that. And I've been podcasting for a long time, but all of a sudden on YouTube, that really started to grow. And I was like, oh, well, here's a way that I can kind of like you do. So that's been my passion in this year and really growing that because I can do it from home. It doesn't wear me out and I can still hopefully inspire
Yeah.
people.
I know when I was looking at the YouTube channel, I thought, like, you have a lot of energy. You do. You probably are a person that just naturally has a lot of
Yeah.
energy and you treat yourself well. So you get energy from that as well. I wanted to ask a question just because it's addressed in the documentary. But what about autoimmune? Are autoimmune conditions on the rise? It seems like gut issues are on the rise. How are you understanding that? And what are great places for people to begin if they're suffering in those categories?
Yes, so it's massively on the rise. It's more
Mhm.
common as a group than heart disease and breast cancer combined, which is startling.
Wow.
It's four
Yeah.
times more common to happen in women than men because of our hormones. And a couple of things. So there's a triad around autoimmunity. We have some genetics that play into that we may not be able to shift. We have environmental triggers, which we often can shift. That could be something as simple as gluten, environmental
Hmm.
toxic exposure, a wrong diet, wrong lifestyle. And so looking for those environmental triggers can be a big piece. And then what you just mentioned, the gut immune interface. So this lining of the gut that's one cell layer thick is really where everything happens. So that gut lumen contains microbes and all kinds of garbage and things, good things too. But if there's a permeability in the gut, some of those contents can leak into the bloodstream. And that's literally ground zero for development of autoimmunity. So it's actually connected. Even if you feel like your gut's pretty healthy and you get an autoimmune disease, you can often shift if you start to, maybe it's a probiotic, or if you have any, we call it dysbiosis, meaning abnormal overgrowth of bacteria or yeast or parasites in the gut, or things contributing to leaky gut, like a mold exposure in your house. So if you go to that place of the gut immune interface and start to calm down the immune system, that will
Okay.
often really either reverse or calm or neutralize some of the autoimmune disease.
Mm-hmm. That's super helpful. I feel like it's within with my children. I have some of the aftermath from my treatments,
Yes.
and yeah, so that I'll just kind of, circle that question as we finish up, because I know you have, more patients to see today. But I could talk to you all day. There's so much we could cover, both for your beautiful body of work, everything that you're putting out there to so support people all over the world. And then just the story. I'm going to say, read Dr. Jill's book. I love the way you did the doctor patient documentary too, where you had, this is what you can pay. And just when you do grassroots projects like that, it
Yeah.
needs to be funded somehow. So I thought that was really cool too. But yeah, best places to find you. We've mentioned a couple, but anything else you'd like to add? I'll put them
Thank
in the
you.
show notes. Hmm.
Sure. So everything can be found at Jill Carnahan, just my name, Jillcarnahan, the book, the movie, I'll link to that. That's my
Yeah.
medical website. And there's like 10 or 12 years of blogs and everything's there, lots of free
So good.
information. So if you
Yeah.
want to
Hmm.
say you want to dive into autoimmunity, my blog there, just search autoimmune and you'll get lots and lots of articles, all free. Podcast you can find on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, anywhere. It's called Resiliency Radio. And then the new project, which I'm so excited you got to see, and I hope if you're listening and want inspiration, you'll go to Dr. Patient Movie. drpatientmovie.com is where the movie is.
So good. It's so good. And I love it because I told you at the top of the hour that I studied radical remission. And so whenever I sit in a space of hearing stories of hope, miracles, turnaround, I mean, it's everything we need. I remember hearing once that when someone's diagnosed, they don't usually say, let's say it's breast cancer stories of hope. They don't Google that. They Google, prognosis or whatever the, risk or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we need the more stories of hope and miracles and faith and trust we can
Yeah.
have in the process, and that there's other ways, other things we can add to, even if we're doing, Western regimens, that
Yeah.
their healing is here for us. It's possible. So thank you for being part of the forefront of that movement.
You're welcome. Anything's
Yeah.
possible, right? And a lot of it
Yeah.
is that mindset. So thank you for
Yeah.
being someone out there that's sharing that message.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Jill. And to the listeners, thanks for being here today. And we will see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening to this episode of Mystical Sisterhood. To learn more about my one-on-one coaching programs or join the Mystical Sisterhood membership, visit MaureenSpielman.com or MysticalSisterhood.com. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next episode.